has long been a contributor to politics in Ireland, and I'm very happy to welcome him here. Mr. Gregory Campbell was elected in 2001 to the Parliament in Westminster, and he has been a member of the Northern Ireland Assembly, or he was a member of the Northern Ireland Assembly since 1998. He served as the Minister for Regional Development in the Assembly from 2000 to 2001, so that was a very important, a very key post, regional development in relation to the Assembly. He's a member of the City Council in Derry since 1981 and served previously on the Northern Ireland Assembly in the 1980s and on the Northern Ireland Forum from 1996 to 1998. He is the author of several publications, most of which focus on discrimination vis-à-vis the Unionists in Northern Ireland, and his contribution to this series of debates, I'm sure, will be very informative. So I would ask you all not just to hear what he has to say, but to really listen and to get the most out of this opportunity, which doesn't come our way very often. Mr. Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Chair, for the invite along tonight. And as I was speaking to some of the organisers just as before we came in this evening about the series, it was only then that I realised that this was in fact the first in the series. And as I was looking through the letter, which I'm sure is the standard letter that has been sent out to all of the political parties, I thought that it was indeed almost a sweet irony that the first speaker who would be speaking on the issue of Ireland, Republicanism and the political parties is someone who eschews all things Irish because he doesn't feel that he is part of the Irish Republic, he doesn't want to be, isn't a Republican, doesn't want to be a Republican, and I suppose has an affiliation with a political party. So I suppose one out of three is not bad. Whenever one looks at the topic of of tonight's proceed, but I jest to some degree. What I wanted to do tonight was first of all to thank you for the invite, not only to the Irish Republic, but to speak to people on a theme that I believe many people probably haven't dwelt on to any significant degree. I think Northern Ireland is a bit, it's a bit like, it's almost a bit like a long lost aunt who you like to think about and you like occasionally to consider and perhaps even have along, but if they're coming for too long, you're really glad to see the back of them again. And I think many people in the Irish Republic feel about Northern Ireland something along those lines. But I want to try and give you an insight, hopefully, that you won't have heard before, and I'll be quite happy to take questions, as the Chair said. I suppose if I was to speak tonight on where I see political parties in Northern Ireland and in the Irish Republic, how they would view the next 2, 3, 4 years, and how they may see progress, if progress can be made, then I think I would have to start, as a man one time said, from somewhere other than here. Now, it's very easy to say, well, yes, if you're going to start from somewhere else, but we are where we are. And unfortunately, that is where we are, so therefore we must move from this particular spot. So I want to look at what may happen, what could happen, and what should happen over the next few years. First of all, where are we? Where do we find ourselves now? People in the Irish Republic voted for the agreement. I think it seems to have developed two names now. Some people call it the Good Friday Agreement, some people call it the Belfast Agreement. There's all sorts of sensitivities around the use of the name. But whatever its name, people voted for it to the tune of probably, I think it was 97 or 98% in the Irish Republic, and about 72% in Northern Ireland. And that really helped to bring us to where we are. Wherever we might want to be is another story, but where we are. Now, what I have to do, and my community have to do, is recognizing that we are where we are, and being very concerned about how we got here, and wanting to go somewhere different. We have to devise a mechanism and a route map in order to get there. Now, irrespective of those percentages, and I don't wish to set them to one side or ignore them or to try and ride roughshod over them, they were democratic percentages, and we can't simply set them to one side and pretend that they did not exist. But in Northern Ireland, anyway, there was a significant number of unionists who voted for that agreement because they felt that it would lead to peace. That agreement was sold under the banner of peace. It was almost, as the Americans call, a mum and apple pie agreement. How could anyone be against peace? It was sold on the grounds of stability, investment, greater job opportunities, a breakdown in sectarian bitterness and barriers, and above all, peace. And part of the price that we were being told that we would have to pay for that would be the release of prisoners and a whole series of other changes. And we were told, and many people were told, if you're prepared to swallow that bitter pill, that will be the objective, the rainbow, the crop of gold at the end of it will be realised in a reasonably short period of time. That's 5 years ago, in the next couple of months, and it hasn't materialised. And the people in the Irish Republic, well, I'll leave you to tell me why they voted for it, but they did. And therefore we come now to 2003, and we are faced with the many difficulties that we are. Part of the rationale for and explanation for the difficulties that we have is that, and we are told this frequently, that the agreement as originally envisaged hasn't been properly implemented. To many unionists, they don't see the underlying problems as emanating from a partial implementation of the agreement. They see the difficulties coming about precisely because it has been implemented, because they see that the agreement was founded upon the basis that if you assuage or try to wean a vicious, brutal terrorist regime off their terrorism by giving them part of what they want and showing them that they can achieve their objectives if they will turn the ratchet of violence down one or two notches on the gear stick, then far from weaning them off, you will encourage them. So it isn't really a case of unionist disenfranchisement, unionist disillusion coming about because their dreams have been shattered because what they voted for hasn't been implemented. It is more that their fears, which they set to one side in order to achieve the prize, have been realised. The fears that the prisoners getting out would lead to more violence, not less. Their fears that if you encouraged men of violence by giving them little bits of what they want, that rather than go away, they would be encouraged in demanding more. It is their fear that that is what has happened in the past 5 years that has led to their disenchantment. But as I say, those unionist communities, people who vote for me and my party, find themselves where they are. and they are now looking for a better way. Other political parties are insisting that there is no other way. I fear that whenever the election is held for the Northern Ireland Assembly, that if the immovable object doesn't be moved, then the irresistible force will have to give way. But I can say this much, that if the election goes ahead on the 1st of May, which it ought to and should, and if the mandate that my party has got in the past is increased to the point that we represent the larger share of the unionist community, we will take the steps that we have to take in order to ensure that there is a better way. So that those who say there is no other way will have to wrestle with and grapple with are the steps that we will take to ensure that there has to be consideration given to consideration of another way. People say, well, how would you do that? And it's a very simple process. At the moment, the legislation allows for the election, the joint election, of a First and Deputy First Minister. And that election takes place jointly, as I say, between the leaders of the larger elements within the unionist communities and the nationalist communities. We have made it very clear, if we are the larger party, we will not nominate a person for First Minister. That action means that the clock begins ticking, whereby a 6-week period is supposed to come into being, whereby at the end of which a First and Deputy First Minister has to be elected. And of course we've seen in the past that the 6-week period can actually become quite a few months, and in some cases a bit longer. But however, we will take that very straightforward and simple action in order to ensure that the better way has to be considered by all, because we will not proceed until we get a realization by all the parties that there has to be a better way. Now, some people say to me, particularly when I come to the Republic, they say, well, what are your alternative proposals? The agreement was voted on and voted by the percentages as I've given, and therefore you should abide by that decision. My answer to that's very simple, in that no election result that I know of has stood the test of time for years, decades, and centuries, because subsequent election results have either enhanced the previous one or replaced it. And that's the same for the Belfast Agreement. It was voted on in 1998, and we are no longer in 1998. It is now history. So we then come to what is likely to be the framework, the table, the conference that might provide the prospect of a breakthrough in Northern Ireland. What I am absolutely certain it cannot be is that it cannot elevate those who support terror, be they unionist or Republican. It cannot be a process that elevates terror and murder like the 1998 system did. That is the fundamental objection that unionists had to that process. Therefore, that's why we want to ensure that we get away from that in the new process. Neither can it be a process that those who advocate violence see it as a vehicle that will achieve their objectives if only they will reduce the violence for a period of time to see if this new vehicle can achieve their objective any more quickly than the vehicle of violence. So it has to be a vehicle where Democrats of whatever background people may have, but it has to be a vehicle that is democratically based, is one that allows the people of Northern Ireland to develop in their respective communities a confidence in that system. Because what sometimes people forget is that in the 5 years, any level of confidence that there existed in 1998 evaporated soon after and has now dissipated completely from within the unionist community, because not only of the violence, but because it was seen as that type of vehicle to accommodate a particular directional flow, i.e. Republicans. It was almost as if, to unionists, Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness were utilising the vehicle, be it, that is called a vehicle, a bus, the vehicle of violence, to get down the Irish Republic and the United Ireland route. And that is the vehicle that they used for many years. And 10 or 15 years ago, the British government, through a series of intermediaries, said, look, if we can provide another vehicle, which is going along the same route, going to get you to the same destination, will you then step off the bus of violence? And for a number of years, the Republicans considered that option and decided that it was a reasonable deal. And I would have to say, if I was a Republican committed to violence, I would have adopted the same approach. In fact, it's a win-win situation for them, because the new vehicle takes them in the same direction. Whether they get there more slowly or more quickly is yet to be determined, but it goes in the same direction as they wish to go. They get the kudos for creating the new vehicle, i.e. Gerry Adams, a man of peace, in inverted commas. And at the same time, they can say, aren't we tremendous people because we have put this violence to one side? We have taken steps of immense bravery and courage. Aren't the IRA to be commended? And yet the new vehicle, be it a train or a taxi, is still going in the same direction. So the new system has got to be one that doesn't have a predetermined outcome in terms of the destination. In other words, it doesn't have a one-way track leading from Belfast to Dublin, politically speaking. And I'm afraid the Republicans will have to decide, do they want to come aboard that new vehicle? Because that new vehicle has to have equality at its root. Because you see, in the Northern Ireland Assembly that was suspended 4 months ago, part of that assembly had an institution called the North-South Ministerial Council. And at the time of the agreement, those unionists who were in favour of the agreement advocated that agreement on one of the bases was that they would get stability, that they would get an absence of violence, that they would get peace, that they would get all of the plus points that I've outlined that the agreement was supposed to deliver. But in addition to that, that even the enhanced North-South cooperation, which can evolve over a period of time, they said will be offset by the greater East-West cooperation that will exist in the British-Irish Council. And again, it didn't materialise, because I posed a series of questions which showed that there were 10 times more meetings dealing with a diversity of issues on the North-South axis as there was on the East-West axis. So we simply cannot have that. I mean, we are quite committed and determined that there ought to be a degree of equity in terms of the balance between Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland as a neighbour to the Irish Republic. But there is no equity if 90% of the business that is done on a north-south, east-west axis is done on the north-south end of that axis. That is simply intolerable. The other thing that would have to be at the centre of a New Deal would be the fact that the system, the actual system that would exist in Northern Ireland, could not possibly countenance a repeat of what we had, where ministers, and the chair was outlining the fact that I was for some time the Minister for Regional Development. It is inconceivable that we could allow the position to pertain again that pertained the last time, which was that you have standalone ministries, that ministers can do as they like. They can consult with the Assembly, they can go before a committee of the Assembly, they can tell the committee what they are going to do. The committee can say they don't like it, they can disagree with it, they can vote against it, but they cannot stop it. And we had examples of that. I'll give you one example. The Sinn Féin Health Minister was faced with the choice in Belfast of a new maternity hospital. Now, she was a MLA for West Belfast, and much of the professional advice indicated that the new maternity hospital should go to the city hospital site, which was in South Belfast. But she said that she was going to put it in the Royal Victoria Hospital complex, which just happened to be in West Belfast, her own constituency, and a very strong Sinn Féin constituency. So the Health Committee at the Assembly met and discussed it. The Health Committee is a cross-party committee. That committee, virtually unanimously, I think, said that the maternity site should go to the city hospital site, not to the minister's own constituency. The Assembly debated it, and the Assembly said, in a plenary session, that that maternity site should go to the city hospital site. But the minister didn't have to take heed to either the committee or the Assembly or the professional opinion, and didn't. The minister simply said it is going to the Royal Victoria Hospital. A stand-alone, silo-like minister. I could have done that if I had wished. I didn't, but I could have. Every minister could have done that. That is simply intolerable. Each of the ministers have to be accountable to the Assembly. So we've got to change that. We've got to change a whole range of other things. We've got to change the whole issue of cultural identity. The perception in about Northern Ireland, as well as in Northern Ireland, but the perception is that there is some sort of discrimination against the Irish cultural outlook in Northern Ireland. And yet nothing could be further from the truth. My cultural outlook is discriminated against in Northern Ireland. The cultural view of many of us who regard ourselves as Ulster Scots want to see that being taught in the state schools of Northern Ireland. But we don't see that. Yet in the maintained sector, which is by and large the Catholic sector, there is a prevalence of the Irish cultural identity. And I do not in any way wish to see that inhibited. But for what they are receiving, I want my community to have the option, if they wish, to have likewise. So the issue in the New Deal will be one of equity. And I know that particularly among some strains of republicanism, there is the perception again that unionists don't like the equality agenda. It's almost as it's perceived and presented as if unionists are totally opposed to equality, that they're afraid of equality. And the reason, of course, that some Republicans say that is that they have a version of equality, in inverted commas, which is anything but equal. It is an elevation of what they see as something that has been excluded and marginalised over the years, and they want to see that take centre stage at the exclusion of other outlooks and other identities. I'm afraid that cannot be central to any new deal. So really, Chairman, I'm coming to the conclusion of my remarks. I'm speaking to you in Dublin in 2003. at a time of great uncertainty in Northern Ireland, where people are unsure about what lies ahead, and they are unsure about what lies ahead because of their bitter experience of what has lain behind them. And they are looking for a new way ahead. They are not looking to abandon their place in the United Kingdom. Virtually all the Protestant community in Northern Ireland and the section of the Catholic community want to be part of the United Kingdom, because that is where they feel that their best hopes and their prospects for a multicultural outlook in life will be best met, rather than with the Irish Republic. So they want to see a new deal. They want to vote for parties that will deliver a new deal. I'm afraid the old deal of 1998 is slowly, very, very slowly, like that ant that I referred to, unwilling to leave, unwilling to depart, but just about, hopefully, to step on the train like I will tomorrow morning on the Enterprise back to Belfast.
Thank you very much for that. I've no doubt that what you said is going to be very controversial here this evening, and I'm grateful to you that you've agreed to take questions from the audience here tonight. What I intend to do is just take 2 or 3 questions and then put them to Mr. Campbell to reply. So I would ask people to keep their questions or statements as short as possible. To keep them short, and I will interrupt you. I came from a big family too, and I know how to be rude about it. I'd ask you to stand up and to give me your name, so that we can reply to each of your questions by name. Maybe this gentleman in the purple scarf.
My name is Roland Sheehan. I'd like to welcome Gregory to Dublin. I'm a solicitor and a writer, and my family have practiced law in Dublin for quite a few generations. Recently I was reading my great-granduncle's reminiscences, John A. Curran's reminiscences, and I thought it would be appropriate to mention this to Gregory because in 1848 John is in Green Street Courthouse when a dairyman is in the dock. He's a solicitor and a writer. His name is John Mitchell. He's been transported to Australia. My ancestors were there then, and they remarked Mr. Mitchell's demeanour, what a fine person he was. The second part of my statement is this. In my last book, I wrote, it's called Foley's Asia. It's kind of a political novel about the Irish in India, where my grandfather was. And I had occasion to write about 2 dairymen, John Lawrence and Henry Lawrence, who were at Foyle College, I think. And they were the leaders of a thing called the Punjab Board. They were very successful administrators of the Punjab. But Henry Lawrence was a very charismatic figure who dealt with, knew many languages, and he was able to deal with various tribes in between India and Afghanistan. But he got into trouble with the English authorities because he was too close to the Afghans, and they said Henry was too Irish. He was too Irish. What would Henry Lawrence do now?
Thank you, Ronan. There's a woman just behind you, yes, with the blue scarf. Can you stand up? Sorry, can you speak up, Nuala?
Well, I think if the Nationalists had had democracy prior to 1969, or civil rights, which is another name for it, there would not have been an armed conflict. And lots of situations in the world were resolved by armed conflict, as Gregory probably knows, 1916 and Algeria and various places. So the Nationalists had to resort to that. I'm not for it, but that's what they had to resort to because there were no civil rights in the North for Catholics, Nationalists. Second thing, little thing I just want to say is that the Royal Victoria Hospital is a world-renowned hospital. The City Hospital isn't, and our own Minister of Health will open new hospitals. It's done recently in County Cork and closed the Monaghan Hospital. So that is not peculiar to Sure thing.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Donald Donnelly is my name. Like one of the previous speakers, I'd like to welcome Gregory as well. In fact, I admire Gregory's style. I watch the Northern Ireland television a lot because I was born and reared in Omagh in County Tyrone. I left it when I was 21. Lucky me. That's over 40 years ago. I would just like to say that Gregory has a very common touch, and I think he would be one of the people who probably can bring the new Ireland, or the new Northern Ireland, to greater things. And my point really basically is, and it follows slightly on what Nuala has just said. There were 5 houses on a terrace in Omagh. In a Catholic, Omagh is a very predominantly Catholic stroke nationalist town. 5 houses. There were ourselves, the Kinlocks, the Arnolds, and the McCluskys and the Devines. My father and mother rented the house. We had no vote. My father and mother had no vote in the local government. Our good neighbours, and marvellous neighbours they were, let me say, Presbyterian neighbours and Methodist neighbours, lovely people. They had next door 2 people, no family. They had 3 votes because Bob had a butcher shop. Now, that explains somewhat. I don't want to go about what about it. The question I want to put to Gregory is this. The question I want to put to Gregory is that, is it possible, because when he talks about East-West, I'd have no difficulty, I'd support him about that. But there's a big question mark, that's why it's not happening. As regards accountability for ministers, we'd all be delighted with some of that, as long as it doesn't go back, as long as it doesn't go to majoritism, if that's the word. So the question I really have for Gregory is there any way that he, as a leading member of the DUP, and a person who's respected across the board, is there any way that he can lead his people towards an understanding of the nationalist stroke Republican or Catholic people in the north of Ireland? Whenever I heard Peter Robinson saying last night on television, these people, you can hardly house train. And that depicts for me, when I came south, people said to me, is the north as bad as what it is? And I would say to them, look, in 1865, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. In 1965, Lincoln and Mr. Johnson was still trying to get them integration in the schools and get them a vote in Alabama. And if we continue with the DUP leading us in a particular direction, there's a great possibility that we'll miss a great opportunity. So I just say to you, Gregory, think about that, because I certainly will give thought and noble mind to the suggestions you've made, and I would support you on some of them.
Very back. Can you stand up, please?
My name is Kevin Barrington. It's just on the question of the kind of institutional removal of violence. Now, outside of the standard end of the conflict scenario where distasteful people are brought into the process, which is a worldwide phenomenon. I mean, can you not explain to your own electorate that, this isn't a new thing that just happened. The Northern Ireland state was set up, and the institutions were set up on the basis of threats of violence. So I don't think we can really be using this as a critique. This is something novel and startling. It's been a factor of the whole structure of Northern Ireland since it's been set up.
Thank you very much. I have to say I hadn't expected quite as many compliments. I'll give Gregory an opportunity to reply to those, and then I'll come back to the floor again, if that's okay. I just give him an opportunity to reply to that one.
The first one, I think, is one of the most difficult. What would Henry Lawrence do now? I don't know what he would do. He certainly, I know that, in fact, the college that you referred to have, as one of their most distinctive accolades to students of high achievement, have got what they call the Lawrence Sword, which each year is awarded to a student of exceptionally high ability. So I suspect that Henry Lawrence would probably seize the initiative, but he may well seize the sword as well. And I don't know what the outcome may well be. The second question was, you see, this is the issue about if nationalists had civil rights. You see, I think that there is a huge gap in understanding of the unionist position. I don't, I'll maybe try and take the two questions, because I think the chap from Omagh was making a similar, although slightly different point, but it was quite similar. You see, I was like our friend here. My parents and grandparents didn't have a vote. I lived in a small, what was called 2 up, 2 down terraced house. If we had to go to the toilet at night, we had to put on shoes or slippers to go down the yard and go outside. We didn't have a bathroom. We had a scurry which you could touch like this on one side, and you could turn to the side, you could touch the other side. And I was a first-class citizen? I don't think so. You know, my first job in the city of Londonderry was serving grass seed to people. And I got the princely sum in 1968 of £3 a week. And when I finished my work, I went home to this 2 up, 2 down terraced house. But I didn't advocate violence to rectify what I saw as discrimination against me. The difference that the unionist community see now is that which nationalists complained of 30 years ago, unionists complain of now. Now, how do I advocate to my community that they don't have to do what nationalists had to do 30 years ago? From their perspective, nationalists said, we haven't got civil rights, we aren't recognised, we cannot seem to get our political agenda on the board, as it were, because we've been totally ignored and sidelined, and nothing that we say has been taken seriously by the ruling unionist establishment. I know I'm simplifying it, but that's effectively what nationalists said happened. That's exactly how unionists feel now. That's exactly how I feel. Every time I go along to the Prime Minister and say, we need a meeting, it's DUP, they're not pro-agreement. We just happen to represent the majority of unionists. But they're not pro-agreement. Ignore them, ignore them. And then they wonder why there's loyalist violence. Because, you know, we can work this both ways. We can say that nationalists were excluded, had to incorporate, even if you don't support it, had to in some way encapsulate a form of violence to get what they seen as their legitimate demands met. Well, why would it be any different to unionists, who feel as excluded, if not more so now, because they see that the violence that the nationalists engaged in worked? And then I go to the unionists and I say, we have got to be law-abiding. We have got to put our case the way I'm putting it here now. We have got to put the rationale of our argument, the logic of our argument. And they say to me, you're wasting your time. An AK-47 works much better. Ask Jerry, ask Martin. It works much better than logic, because logic goes in one ear of Tony Blair and goes out the other. An AK-47 doesn't. He sits up and takes notice. When Canary Wharf goes up in smoke, he will have a welcome mat out. Come in, Jerry and Martin, because we have things to discuss. Unionists are kept on one side. So, you know, I would really be going down a hobby horse here if I elaborated on this, but that's how unionists feel. That is how they feel now. And I understand that nationalists felt like that 30 or 40 years ago. I just hope that nationalists know that that's how unionists feel now. And that's part of the reason, and you cannot justify, I want to be clear about this, you can't justify, defend or condone any of the unionist or loyalist violence. It is totally deplorable. And I've always called for it to stop, campaigned for it to stop, and asked for our people to report everything that they can to the police in order to get it to stop. So I don't want anything that I say as being misconstrued as in some way justifying violence, because you can't justify it. The question from the back was, I think, about the setting up of Northern Ireland on the threat of violence. Well, you know, in answer to that, I think that's where we came in. You know, we are where we are, and you know, I could go back to 800 years ago and ask, why did the only English Pope ever decide to go to Ireland? And we are where we are now. So, you know, I really don't think that we will make progress into the future by sort of getting the analogy of the bus that I talked about and saying, well, I'd like to stop at 1921, please, because that's a good place to stop. You know, we could stop at the 17th century, where unionists like to stop, or we could stop at the 12th century. You know, we could stop anywhere we want that is convenient to an argument that we might be making. I know it's a long-winded answer, but sorry.
Gentleman, green shirt.
My name's...
Can you stand up, please?
Sorry. My name's Frank Fitzpatrick. There's an extraordinary amount in what Mr. Campbell said, and it's extraordinarily interesting to hear it so well and so sharply expressed. But to Irish nationalists, it looks as if Mr. Campbell has come to the spot that almost every community that's ever dwelt in Ireland has come to, where they see the principal obstacle to their development, the expression of their culture, as the complete indifference, arrogance, casualness, offhandedness of Westminster. You talk about Tony Blair the way people would have talked about bloody Balfour in the South 60 or 70 years ago. I have a second question, and this is, I would be of a nationalist or Republican view, and yet I'm not sure that even all nationalists and all Republicans in the Irish Republic would wish to see Irish unity at any time in the near future. But I don't think you would find anyone who would wish to see anything other than a situation where there was a surgical equality between the two communities in Northern Ireland. I spoke many years ago to an elderly Irish civil servant who was close to some serious decisions at the time of the arms crisis. And he said to me, it was very simple. We thought we'd have to take 50,000 refugees south or to send 500 rifles north. People here regard the 6 counties not exactly as an embarrassing act, but as an alcoholic and slightly deranged act who is sometimes let out on a visit to civilized people. And there is a good deal more of the plague on both your houses mentality. I don't share it because I've relatives who are Northern nationalists. But it's a real factor in thinking down here. And I would ask you to consider that as well. Now, I'm sure there are people in this room who don't share quite that view of it. So.
Okay, just one question behind the door.
Would the lecturer say, if in the future there comes a situation where there's a possibility of a vote on Irish unity or continuation of the United Kingdom in Northern Ireland, in the 6-county area, and there was a majority in favour of Irish unity, would he accept that majority?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Probert.
My name is Manus O'Riordan, and I subscribe to the Irish Republicanism espoused by Father Michael O'Flanagan, who was Vice President of Sinn Féin in 1917, made the point that when we start talking to the Ulster Covenanters as fellow men, perhaps ultimately they might agree with us as fellow countrymen, and it would be as wrong for us to coerce the 4 counties of North East Ulster as it is for the British to coerce us. So it was on that basis from the 1970s onwards that I was part of a small group of people that fought for the deletion of Articles 2 and 3 when people didn't know what it meant. When we were putting up posters around the city, they didn't know what it meant, because my republicanism was republicanism by consent, and consent included the right to say no. Now, what distresses me about unionism today is when it doesn't realise that it won that argument. That if unionism had in fact said to its own rank and file, we have forced republicanism to admit and to concede that there will be no change in the constitutional status of Northern Ireland unless it is by the wish of the democracy of Northern Ireland itself. And I think that is the dilemma that unionism is in, that in fact it didn't build on an achievement, that a war was fought to a stalemate. Unionism couldn't rule as before on the basis of majoritarian principle, neither could republicanism override the wishes of the Northern Ireland majority. And I think it's that failure of unionism to realise the progress that was made in the transformation, not only of Republican ideology in the South, but of Republican ideology in the North, to come to terms with that reality. That if in effect the DUP had also functioned within the Good Friday Agreement as part of the Cabinet and not just as solitary ministers, and I think everybody agrees who looks objectively at it that both yourself and your predecessor Nigel Dodds did a good job as individual ministers, but again it was as part of the solo run that you complained about in the case of Barbara de Bruin, that if in fact there had been a requirement of cabinet responsibility and cabinet cohesiveness in the sort of policies being implemented, with you at the cabinet table arguing with Barbara de Bruin, it might have been a different kettle of fish. And finally, my final point is that in fact you lose a lot of the argument by still relying on the old tit-for-tat sectarianism. Sinn Féin lost a lot of the argument for quite a while on the Irish language when it made the Irish language a badge of being for Sinn Féin. I think they've had to see beyond that, and in seeing beyond that, they've actually got a respect for the Irish language amongst quite a number of members of the Unionist community. Similarly, in the case of Ulster Scots, there is one native Ulster Scotch speaker who went to the pinnacle of society in Northern Ireland, but is not referred to in any of this. But if you actually read his autobiography, you will find he had to learn English at school, having had a different language at home, Ulster Scots, and that was Cardinal Cahal Daly. Ulster Scots is actually as much the property of elements of Catholic society in Northern Ireland as Protestant society. And if you actually broaden the concept of multiculturalism to encourage a genuine appreciation of all the cultural ramifications of Northern Ireland, that cross-community support will be all the more forthcoming.
Thank you very much.
Interestingly enough, my name is Michael O'Flanagan. I'm not a grandson of Father Michael. I'd like to welcome Gregory to this historic house, the home of Patrick Pearse, and I'd like you to, give us some idea as to whether you think Patrick Pearse was a significant figure, or was he a force for the good or ill, or what do you think of Patrick Pearse?
And I'll take one more question from the floor. I'd like to take a woman, if you don't mind. Yes. Yes.
I'm in agreement with my name. Now, Mr. Campbell, you mentioned about the Belfast Agreement having, or the Good Friday Agreement, whatever you like to call it, having outlived its usefulness, and that it's time to move on from there. But do you think it is fair that a national and an international agreement, is it fair and just to discount it just because the outcome of it doesn't suit one particular grouping? My question.
Thank you very much, and go on, because your hand was up like a shot, so you're allowed to ask your question.
Well, my name is Daniel, kind of licensed, and I have to put just a bit of I don't have the Irish language, and I still have my British passport. But what I like about this place is that it's a republic. To that I like it here, and I don't have any time for monarchs. I don't know, why Gregory Campbell has time for monarchs, but perhaps he'll explain. But another thing that interested me, when you addressed us, your first part of your address, you say, well, nothing is forever. Everything sort of changes a bit after a new election. I remembered how a few years ago his party leader, the Reverend Dr. Ian Paisley, was demanding of the British government, then the Tory government, I think, that there should be a cast iron promise from the Tory government that whatever happened, Ulster or the Six Counties territory would always, forever, remain British. So I find that there's been a certain advance in this. But another point, and I think it's, it's just a reverse of reality, but the point, and this leads me to another thing. You say that I've had my doubts too about the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, Stormont Agreement, call it what you will, but I really, for the life of me, I cannot see how it's going to lead you into the Irish Republic. I that's one of my doubts actually. This is I just don't see you hard-headed Protestant Ulster people suddenly waking up one day and looking out of the window and seeing the pillar boxes all painted green and sort of the Garda sergeant. You're just not, I don't believe, I have enough respect for you, may I say, to believe that you're not going to be, you can't be conned in, to such a fait accompli. the point about the point about the hospitals, I think, has been made that it's all over the place. It's also been worked, I believe, in Tyrone against a Catholic area. So but I agree that there should be more. The territorial government should be more responsible to opinion to the will of the Assembly, no doubt. But finally, yes, you had it rough in 1968. I know, there were Protestants. I agree, there were Protestants. It was the whole discrimination thing was not, in my opinion, about discriminating by Protestants against Catholics. It was discriminating quite simply to keep the Unionist Party in power, if possible, to overcome the problem of the nothing is forever problem if they possibly could. And you were one of the victims as much as others. But what I don't know, Gregory, and perhaps you could tell us, is what did you do about it? In 1968, it wasn't a question of violence at that time. 69 was, August 69 was then the sort of shit hit the fan. Even before that, there'd be explosions by, I think, people who claimed to be loyalists. I mean, probably didn't march in Derry about it. Perhaps you did, I don't know. Do you even go around to your Unionist branch and demand that something be done about this gross discrimination against the poor? I'd like to hear from you.
He was very young then.
Can you respond to all those topics?
There's about 6 there. I think the first point was quite a humorous one about I think Northern Ireland is more like a slightly deranged aunt, so not alcoholic. Well, I couldn't possibly comment on that. I don't think you'd expect me to either. In this nation of sobriety and then there was another question followed it about a vote. Now that is a very interesting point, very serious point. That's the short answer is yes. But again, you see, Unionists look at it's a bit like the glass being half full or half empty. Unionists say, when I talk to them, for many years we would have had a series of sort of political requirements that we would like to have seen successive British governments implement. And when we had a vote on them, we had the majority. And the British government said, it doesn't matter. And we said, well, why doesn't it matter? And we said, because you need cross-community consensus. And we said, well, that's not, doesn't sound like democracy. In those terms, we're talking now about 1970s, 1980s, in that what had gone before wasn't based on those lines. And over a period of time, it got into almost to the political thesaurus. You simply had to have cross-community consensus. You had to have, whatever way you like to call it, whether it was power sharing, or there's all sorts of names given for it. But the essence of it meant that if you had a political dogma and an objective that you wanted to try and reach, in order to get it seriously considered, there had to be large segments of both main communities endorsing. That's effectively, if we use the shorthand, that's effectively what it is. But if I read right what I'm being asked now, is that all that would then go by the board. That if on some sunny or not so sunny morning we're waking up and there's a vote and it's 50% plus 1 for United Ireland, everybody says, outside of Northern Ireland, everybody says, well, that's it then, all done. And we go, hang on, what about remember that cross-community consensus? And they go, what was that about? Cross-community consensus? No, there's a vote now. And we go, oh, right. So a bit of a change here. Whenever we got a majority, it had to be cross-community consensus. Whenever nationalism or republicanism gets a majority, that's it. I'm afraid not. It's either one or the other. You can't simply change. You can't say, well, because unionists are a majority, they must bring nationalists with them. And then say, when nationalists are in a majority, they don't have to bring unionists with them. But the bottom line, and the question is, if there was a vote, we would accept it, but we think that you should accept the vote now. Some people seem to say we don't accept it now, but when it comes round to what we would like it to be, we hope that you'll accept it then. I don't think you can do that, really.
Right, you'll be Minister for Health for the whole of Ireland then.
Thanks for that. I'll bear it in
All
mind.
hospitals have been Derry.
I'll tell my great-grandchildren to bear that in mind. Yeah, there was a question I think at the front about unionists winning the argument. Well, I just don't accept that unionists did win the argument. I accept that Articles 2 and 3, I accept that Articles 2 and 3, that was an issue that was resolved. The dispute that I would have is that we had to go through all the hoops to get it resolved. And my argument would have been that it shouldn't have been a bargaining counter in the first place. That was something that was untenable in the first place. I think the question about Patrick Pearse, yes, I think that he was an outstanding nationalist figure, and I would expect nationalists and Republicans to look up to someone like Patrick Pearse. I just hope that they don't expect me to. Yeah, the business about agreement not suiting one grouping, I think maybe I've answered that in relation to the other question. You know, that I think if we're going to move, we have to try and move in a direction and in a sense that sizable numbers in both communities are content with. The past experience shows that if you don't have that on either side, it simply doesn't work. So therefore I think we should learn that lesson. Comment about monarchs or Republicans from the front. I'm a monarchist, although I'll not comment on some of the activities of some of the minor royals. Maybe if I don't comment, that speaks volumes. The business about suddenly there being United Ireland, it's because that I believe that the Belfast Agreement won't suddenly deliver a United Ireland, that I'm opposed to it. Not because that it won't suddenly deliver a United Ireland, that it won't deliver it. It's precisely because you've probably heard the old story of if you have a saucepan of boiling water and you put a frog into it, it'll jump out. Put the frog into cold water and just heat it gently. The frog will stay there until it boils and stay. We're afraid that we're the frog in the cold water and the heat's coming on and it's going to happen gradually so that the post boxes won't be painted green overnight. It won't take a year or 2 years or 3 years, but that the whole system has an end objective, which is to try and have commonality between Northern Ireland and the Republic, try and set up a common health practice, try and set up an agricultural basis, try and set up an education basis that is common between Northern Ireland and the Republic. And we say, well, why? If you're not going towards a United Ireland, why do you do that? They don't do it between Norway and Sweden, they don't do it between Canada and the United States, they don't do it anywhere else where there's a land boundary between two countries, unless they have an objective to eliminating that land boundary between the two adjoining countries. What did I do in '68? I think that was the last one. For my sins, I joined the Young Unionists in order to do what you intimated I should do, and I very soon realised I was going nowhere and joined the DUP. Thank you.